Today, we are examining a critical issue that does not get enough attention here in Congress or throughout the nation: childhood trauma. Childhood trauma is a pervasive public health issue with long-term negative health effects that cost the United States billions of dollars. In 1998, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention published a landmark study that found that adults who suffered from adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs, are at a much greater risk of several leading causes of death. The study examined the effects of adverse child experiences such as abuse, neglect, or separation from a parent. And it also examined the long-term effects that these events have on children throughout the rest of their lives. The science is powerful. If you would all please rise and raise your right hands. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Chairman Elijah Cummings, Ranking Member Jim Jordan, and other distinguished members, I am deeply humbled and honored to testify before such an esteemed group of leaders who've come together as concerned Americans to address this troubling and ever-growing epidemic of childhood trauma. I also would like to pay my respect for those who came before us, being so willing to share their pain. I applaud your efforts and hope that I can add a little bit of science and maybe much more about my on-the-ground experience to assist in the decisions that I know that you will make. My colleagues before have talked a lot about the ACEs, so I'm going to skip that. But what I would just like, there's a metaphor that keeps coming up for me that pediatrician and psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott used to describe children who were suffering, unfortunately, from the trauma of their parents. And he called it that they were suffering primitive agony. And unfortunately, we sometimes have children in communities or in the societies in which they belong where they're not the protective factors and resilience-building conditions for them to heal and ultimately thrive and reach their potential. I have lived and worked through the impact of the natural disaster Katrina that decimated New Orleans in 2005. And unfortunately, some of those effects are still being felt by certain communities. And now, today, we're under threat of another flood, and I know that the people in New Orleans are re-traumatized and are triggered. The lessons that we've learned from Katrina are very applicable to disasters in other places. California, the earthquakes, the fires; in the West, the tornadoes, the blizzards and the snows in the Atlantic and Northeast, and any other extreme weather event. Because unfortunately for children, it shatters their view that the world is safe. And oftentimes, it shatters the view that the adults can protect them, because oftentimes the adults themselves become dysregulated. And when you add that to children who are living in spaces with chronic adversities, where they have to deal with the impact of violence on a daily basis, or being bullied excessively, or being in foster care systems, as was added to the conventional ACEs, we know that this becomes even more difficult for them. The impact of exposure to a natural or technological disaster, as happened in the Gulf, can be profound when that's added for communities that are underserved and living with community trauma. There is evidence now, as was earlier said, that there are these very potentially disabling, negative proximal and distal physical and mental health outcomes of childhood trauma and that it costs so much. So what I, as my distinguished colleagues before me have said, the Centers for Disease Control, the academics centers who are studying this, the professional organizations like the ones I belong to, the American Psychiatric Association, we have a role to play with those who have the lived experiences of trauma and the community members who need to understand that trauma is not normal. In many of our communities, and I have a case of a young man who, after he witnessed someone being killed in front of him, his mother told him, "It's okay, baby, you'll get over it, don't worry." And so he didn't know that he was gonna get worried and ended up with a life in prison, doing all the things because of his dysregulation. But lucky for him, he found another pathway and is now a teacher. And so I think about him and I think about the need for us to inform our communities that trauma is not normal, we can't keep it moving, and that we need then to think about the services that we will need when our children have these experiences. Thank you.